Hey, discerning listeners, 90-Day Fiancé. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. As I always say, don't use YouTube as a replacement for therapy. If you need a therapist, get one. You deserve it. Let's watch.
Would have come out, though.
Yeah.
I know it wasn't an ideal trip.
Was a lot of Soulja Boy talk.
Have you ever even listened to his music?
Not really.
I'm such a fan. It's so bad. It's my favorite song. Don't play no games, no. Right now, I care for you, girl. I see you fine girl from the internet. I'm crazy. That's my boyfriend.
All right, so on one hand, you would like to see that a girlfriend is proud and enjoys the artistic endeavors of her boyfriend. So what's the alternative here? That she hates his music or doesn't appreciate it or doesn't like his interests, that kind of thing. So that's good. On the other hand, there's something odd about this, that she is coming across like she's, well, okay. So on one hand, I think it's a little off-putting because it's her son that she is talking to right now, and the way she's talking to him, it's like she's a teenager, okay? And I think for an adult son, it might just be like, Mom, like you're a grown woman. Why are you acting like a teenager that is in love or has a crush on a famous person or something? But he's a grown man, and I don't think he's going to be damaged by this. The other thing I'll say is that when we fall in love, regardless of our age, it will look to outsiders as if you are acting like a teenager or a young person. To be more accurate, when we fall in love, when we think about the markers of falling in love and being infatuated with someone, we typically associate it with teenagers because that's when people typically will exhibit and very noticeably that sort of infatuation. But it's not that it's a teenage thing, it's just a human thing. And typically in media, it just gets depicted as a teenage thing. And so you'll have people in their 50s falling in love, and they will look like a teenager. And there's self-judgment, there's oppression of that, if you will. People saying like, you're a grown woman, like you need to act like it. And what I'll say is we need to stop that, because when people fall in love, it just, you feel those feelings. You're infatuated, you're interested in them, you get giddy, you can't stop thinking about them, you want to tell everyone about that person, you want to just stare into their eyes and hug them and kiss them and be with them, text them all day long, you get giddy, that sort of thing. And to suppress that is to suppress your true nature, which isn't healthy, obviously. Now, not everyone does that, not even teenagers, obviously. So it's not universal for sure in terms of the expression of it, but we clearly evolved to be infatuated and to be giddy about our partner because it's a manifestation of almost an addiction, if you will, to our partners. A compulsion is probably a better word, a preoccupation, an over-focus on a partner, because when we have that mechanism, it promotes coupling, which obviously was a part of our survival as a species in the past, because procreation and sharing of resources and bonding is important to not only procreation, but also raising a child. It also reminds me of previous interviews that she's had, Kim, about Usman, where she seems to be coming across halfway like a person who was in a relationship and has a regular human-to-human relationship, and the other half seems to be like she's infatuated with a famous person, that she's a super fan. The way she talks, I win, the way that a groupie might say, I win, I got backstage, instead of actually dealing with a human being, someone that has three dimensions, someone that is way beyond their fame. We would hope that when you start dating a famous person, there's a little bit of that fandom in the beginning, but pretty quickly the human emerges and eclipses the famous person. And so Kim might still kind of be there. It's hard to say though, because like I said, there's nothing wrong with her enjoying his music. I'm a musician and it's nice if my family and friends are like, oh, they don't have to like it, but it certainly would be nice on a certain level. My dad actually likes this one cover that I made of an REM song called Wendell G from the mid-'80s. I loved REM in the early mid-'80s. I'm sort of a hipster about REM. I don't like 99% of what they've put out. But there's a song called Wendell G that I actually covered, and every once in a while my dad will just post it on Facebook and be like, oh, listen to this song, and I'm like, oh, my dad must. And if you're interested, you can go to SoundCloud Kirk Honda. I think it's on there. Anyway, so you know, she enjoys his music, and that's a good thing. She and I'm sure that helps in their relationship. Usman is seemingly really defined by that. By the way, I didn't react last week, I think, to conversations that he was having, Usman, with his brother, and how the brother was like, you know, our mom is really waiting for you to have kids, and there's a lot of pressure from his family and I think in his culture to have children. And Usman saying, not a problem. I'll marry Kim, and I'll also marry other women, or at least one other woman, and then I'll have children right away. I don't have any doubt that Kim will let me marry other people. Kim has stated that she's okay with that. I think I also talked about how I don't think Kim, at least the way she talks, I don't think Kim fully is internalizing the reality of what will happen, or at least what could happen. Right, because she thinks, well, he'll just have a surrogate to have his children. He won't be bonded with her. I'll be special. It'll just be this side thing that maybe he is with this person a couple days out of the month or something. But who knows what would happen? He could have 5 other wives potentially, and they could all be prioritized over Kim. Kim just, I think, is wishful thinking along those lines. But, you know, maybe it'll turn out okay. And maybe Kim will also adjust. She seems to be, I don't know, I would be really worried about her, but let's get back.
I want you guys to have your own thing. You know what I mean? Like without me, you know?
Or we can just not. I just really do hope that you're not gonna propose as soon as you get there.
Like you don't want me to get carried away, right? I want you to like trust me a little bit. This is the chance I'm taking.
Yeah, so I'm glad they're having this conversation. There's a lot of hopes I would have for them if Kim and Usman are getting married, and it's going to be long term. It's rational for Kim to want her son and Usman to have their own thing, as she put it. I don't know if I included that clip. And he's like, well, what if we don't? Now, they edit this pretty heavily, so who knows what the son said. He might have said something like, in a joking way, well, how about we don't have a relationship? Because he seems more reasonable than that. I don't think he would just say, well, maybe he would, honestly, given other things that he said. So I think it's good that that Kim is saying that, because Kim dragged the son into it, right, last season, or the only season we ever saw them. Anyway, and if you're the son, it would really be in his best interest to at least try to make something work with Usman. If Usman was abusive or harmful in some way to Kim, I don't think we'd fault him for rejecting his new potential stepfather. But I feel a lot of people, and I talk about this all the time, that when it comes to these situations, a lot of Americans just want to avoid the whole thing. They're just like, nah, I don't like Usman. I'm not going to bond with him, and screw that noise. And because there's no real incentive I'll say there's no real immediate need to bond between those two people. But over time, it can really present a lot of problems if there isn't some goodwill between these two people. So it would be in their best interest to try to make it work. Plus, I imagine Usman would be up for that. And I'm always spouting about this sort of thing because I feel like it's not talked about enough. When you get a new job, or there's a friend of a friend or an in-law, you're entering into a relationship that you might not have initiated yourself. It's sort of by circumstance. And I think we all benefit from trying to establish some goodwill with those individuals, because if and when there are conflicts or tensions between you and this other person, there's much less likelihood of it blossoming into something that's out of control and problematic for everyone if you have some goodwill between those people. So it's something to pay attention to. And some people are just really naturally good at this sort of thing. For example, I can go back and forth. In my earlier life, I tended to not out of shyness. I think just not really. I'll give one example, just bear with me. When I had my first job as a therapist, actually at the age of 25, at 24 or something, I was shy and wasn't good at all with small talk. In fact, I had no skills. And I even over time developed this attitude that, well, small talk is illogical and stupid, but that was just the defense because I was shy and I didn't know how to do it, or I was scared, or I don't know, something. So at my first job as a therapist, I just kept my head down and did my job. But as a result, it was apparently off-putting to other people, and people started to develop these theories about what was going on in my head. You know, the shy person at school is often considered to be aloof and arrogant and above it all, stuck up is what we used to say in the 80s. And I think people started to think that about me, but they couldn't have been more wrong. I mean, I was terrified and just trying to stay out of people's way and was not thinking I was above anyone by any means. And long story short, and you can actually read the first chapter of my book on supervision to actually read more about this, but I was fired after just like 8 weeks in my first internship. It was pretty devastating and awful. And I did give up as a therapist at that point. I was like, well, obviously I'm a terrible therapist and I'm not made for this job, and I guess I'll just pay off the debt over time and do something else with my career. And then a very important figure in my life, a professor, actually convinced me to give it another shot, and I got a second internship and everything worked out fine, and the rest is history, and I've never been fired again after 25 years as a therapist. Long story short, I actually ran into that supervisor that fired me at the first internship 20 years later and confronted him about it because I'd been really busted up about it the entire time, and it was really adrenaline surge when I walked up to him. I actually just ran into him at a conference, and he said that, long story short, basically that the reason why I was fired had nothing really to do with me and more to do with what the organization was going through anyway. So the second internship I had, I actually, because of that feedback I got from the first internship, I set out to push beyond my typical shyness and negative attitudes about small talk, and actually engaged in a lot of smiling and eye contact. And it was hard. I had to really force myself to do it. It didn't feel natural. And but it was out of survival, because if I got fired from a second internship, like that truly would be the end of my career. Because I think the program even said, if you get fired at a second internship, it's not them, it's you. So you will be kicked out of the program. So I was, really dedicated, and every day it was hard, but I managed. I would just walk into people's offices, other therapists, and just kind of chat with them for 5 minutes. And that was like not my way. I was always like, I don't know these people at work. Why? I don't want to be friends. I have friends. I don't need to be chatty with these people. And if they're insecure and if they're bothered by my quietness, then that's on them, because I'm not bothered by them. If I see another quiet person, I don't get intimidated by them or assume that they're aloof and arrogant or stuck up or anything. I'm just like, well, they're quiet. Who cares? Lay off, have some maturity and differentiation, self-confidence, or anyway. So I had to really push past all that and actually network and smooze and small talk, and it came pretty easy to me. I sort of broke the ice in the beginning, right? It's always that first few steps of just breaking the ice, and then it just becomes normal, and then people are more comfortable around you, and they're more smiley with you, which makes it easier to be smiley with them, and da-da-da. And I really enjoyed my first internship and enjoyed my coworkers and felt so much better, and I was actually hired at that site, which was quite an honor. They didn't usually hire interns, and that was a reflection of a number of things, but one was just that I was likable and I wasn't off-putting like my first internship site. So anyway, it's along those lines that when you meet an in-law or a friend of a friend, or there's a new coworker, or you are new on the job, having that dedication to bonding and building those foundations of a relationship, some goodwill. And by the way, actually, was listening to a podcast, and they were talking about a study, and I think I'm actually going to talk about this in the audio podcast sometime. But anyway, the point is that when they studied individuals and said, how much talking should you do in a relationship when you first meet someone, or various different other kinds of relationships, to be likable? What percentage of time should you be the one talking if you want people to like you and be comfortable, this sort of thing? People almost always drastically underestimated how much talking they should engage in, because there's this assumption that to be likable, you should listen more, right? And you should not talk so much. There's a lot of shame around extending yourself and being vulnerable and talking too much. Some people could use with a little bit of that mechanism, because some people do talk too much, but the average person assumes they should talk as little as possible. But when they actually ran experiments, they found that the actual amount of talking one should do is much greater, sometimes 50% or more, that you should be talking a lot if you want to make people feel comfortable, if you want people to like you, if you want people to prefer you, that sort of thing. And it's counterintuitive, I think, because of our culture. We just tell people to shut up, and we shame all that. We have all these internalized voices like, you're talking too much, you know. So it's along those lines. If you want people to feel comfortable around you, and again, there's a system, there's a back and forth. When you put effort and they put effort, you build something, and then the next 5 minutes of the interaction is way more comfortable, and there's more fluidity and more spontaneity and safety and trust, and then you build on that, and it just gets deeper and deeper. I would hope that for the son and Usman, they could put effort into that.
My heart's pounding outside of my chest now. To Nigeria. Usman and I have a connection like no other man I've ever been with. I never thought I would have to fly halfway across the world to find that, but I did. Thank you.
All right, so 2 thoughts on that statement, that Usman and I have a connection greater than any other man I've ever been with. So, well, 3 thoughts. One is that it could absolutely be true. It's hard to believe that. It's hard to believe that they have a very, very strong connection based on what we've seen on the show. But we understand that the footage that we see is curated and selected in a way by the editors to create drama. And I think it's not very compelling TV to show people bonding and having a regular relationship. So we have no idea what's really happening. But they could have a really deep connection, and we would never know that. We also understand that whenever we see them on the show, they know the cameras are there, and that affects things. So it's hard to know what their relationship is actually like. So there's that possibility. The other possibility is that she needs it to be close when it actually isn't very close, and she is distorting because she needs it to be that way. I've talked about this before with other couples. When we have schemas that involve us not being lovable, or that relationships will never work out, or that other partners will never truly love us, then we are demoralized. We have this idea like it's not going to work. We have a voice in our head, so to speak, that's telling us it's not going to work. You're not lovable, or no one can be trusted. All these messages. But there's another part of us that is desperate for connection and love and companionship and validation and togetherness and connection. And so that voice is saying, no, it's going to work. It'll work. It's this denial, and it's a side of us that is overly optimistic, because Darcy, I think, was doing this sometimes. And so they'll vacillate between these two positions. And whenever there's something negative that happens, that voice that is negative will become prominent. And it's like, here it is again. No one's ever going to love me, or whatever sort of old tape plays. And when things are going okay, then it's, black and white situation of like, it's wonderful. This is the best relationship I've ever been in. So there's that thought. The other thought I have is that when you first meet someone, in the polyamorous community, they call it new relationship energy. And I really love this phrase. I don't know if they invented it, but it's this idea that when you first fall in love or infatuation or have a crush or something, the relationship is intense and you can't really see any of the negatives of the other person, or it's hard, generally speaking. The other person can do no wrong in your eyes because your brain is very oriented towards that human being. And the fourth factor that it could be is that her relationships have been so poor in the past that this is the most connected relationship she has ever had, even though there is not much of a connection. And or the past relationships might have started okay, but pretty quickly became harmful to her, abusive to her. I think she might have mentioned that. So this could be the best relationship she's ever been in. And if we had a full inventory of our relationships, we'd be like, well, yeah, but that's not saying much, we might conclude. Another part of this actually could be the fact that they're long distance, that they actually haven't spent that much time together. It's always interesting to think about because I think they've been involved with each other for at least a couple of years, maybe longer, but how many weeks have they actually spent together in person? I'm just going to take a guess and say that it's 2 months, 3 months tops, who knows? And when you're in a relationship like that, it's common for us to, one, long for that person because we miss them so much, and two, we get stuck in that beginning stage of a relationship where the person can do no wrong, even though it's been 2 or 3 years into the relationship. And three, you never actually experience each other in real life. You're when she flies in or he flies, has he come to the States? And they have this concentrated time where they're trying to be on their best behavior, or they're on vacation, so everything's fine. When you actually experience people, you get to a stage in a relationship, you move in together, or you just become part of each other's lives, you really start experiencing the other person in all their true glory. Their regular personality, their sort of cruising speed personality is revealed, and that's when you can truly evaluate whether or not you and this other person are compatible. So they might not have ever experienced that. All right, well, I have an announcement, and I'm going to read something here. One of our listeners, who is a designer, has offered to redesign the Psychology in Seattle website to make it more user-friendly. If you would like to help, she is looking for participants to share what they like and don't like about the current website in a 20-minute interview. To sign up for an interview or simply share feedback about the website, please reach out to Jocelyn at psychologyinseattleredesign@gmail.com. Again, that's psychologyinseattleredesign@gmail.com. Huge thank you to everyone who participates. It would be really helpful. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.